All right, Arif, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So to start, can you tell us a little bit more about the journey that led you to founding Komodo Health? You can start as early as you'd like.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to start when I was 4, but that's probably not going to be good for everyone here. So, no, I have a interesting background coming at technology from medicine. So I was finishing up my schooling for medical school. I wanted to be a doctor, knew I wanted to practice. But during the journey, I got so fascinated by problems in our healthcare system. And it was incredible to me how technology, in this time, like EHRs were really kind of gaining steam in this early 2000s, and we were still not seeing adoption there. We're still not seeing the way, data could be used at scale, but it was just an amazing time to be looking at the transformation of clinical practice. And so with that passion, I decided that I wanted to understand policy. I wanted to think about healthcare systems and how they operated more efficiently, and decided to start my career actually in healthcare consulting. Working with life sciences companies, payers, providers to really understand the healthcare system and think about ways to make it better, and use policy as an opportunity to understand, or a lens to understand those differences, and then use the impact that you can have on both private and government institutions to actually then affect the change that we want. And so I spent 7 years in consulting, seeing how business worked. And there were just such incredible observations that you have in terms of inefficiencies that lead to worse patient outcomes. And with that theme, we kind of looked at the world and said there was so much opportunity to improve patient outcomes. Data was becoming more available and accessible. Software was transforming not only to the cloud, but the ability to process data at incredible scale. And the opportunity really was there to do something meaningful in healthcare. And so I happened to meet my co-founder, Web Sun, in 2014. And the two of us really put our heads together on how we could use all of this to improve patient outcomes. And that was the genesis of Comodo. You sort of think about the journey, and it's like it's years of observing something combined with what was a pretty seismic shift in the way that technology and data were operating.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you timed it to perfection. And I know in a previous podcast interview, you had mentioned that at one point you wanted to become a neurosurgeon.
Yes.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm curious. When
I started at 4 in
happened.
that one. So my, for me personally, I love the study of neuroscience. I did my undergraduate and master's in molecular and cellular neuroscience. I always saw myself doing research, and I had always done research in different aspects of neurology. And for me, surgery is this beautiful combination of both, working with your hands to actually, do something that has a massive impact on the patient, as well the kind of the fascination with brain sciences and how that's evolved. And so I had this big dream of practicing. And then when I was in medical school, that's when I realized, what it actually took to be amazing at your craft. You have to give up a lot to do that. And the friends of mine who are neurosurgeons today, I mean, they've just made an incredible 10 to 15 year commitment to develop the training and expertise to be able to perform surgery at scale. And for me to give up my passion kind of in the, thinking about the system at scale and thinking about the use of data was hard. And I have incredible respect for providers that are really the triple threat. They teach, they do research and they practice. But I knew in order to hone the thing that I loved, I would have to give up a lot. And so that's when it was during that time in medical school that I started to develop this thesis that I was actually really interested in how systems worked. And I had this very conflicting view as to whether I go into residency or pursue this dream. And, I actually joined consulting with the intention of coming back and doing residency. I thought that was just as a business residency, then I'll go back and do my internship in residency and move to being a practicing clinician. But through the journey, discovered how much I actually loved being on the other side of the fence to actually work with institutions to make big changes.
That's incredible. Yeah, it sounds like you wanted to sort of take a step back, and since you had sort of recognized and acknowledged these issues or opportunities in the institutional level, you figured maybe that was where you wanted to spend your time. And of course, as a neurosurgeon, I'm sure you have very, very large impact on at a micro level, and you can sort of extend beyond that as well. But it sort of makes more sense working in the business world to try to force those impacts. Is that sort of how you thought through it?
Yeah, and frankly, my skill set, like you would not want me as a surgeon. That is just not good for humanity. And so we all recognize where our talents lie. And I think one of the most important things for me was understanding what I was good at, understanding what I wasn't good at, and then being able to make a trade-off between the things that I loved and were super passionate about, and well, really intersecting that with things that I actually knew I could make a difference on. And so, I believe there, is this belief that AI and machine learning and kind of like this broader field of data can impact populations, but at the end of the day, when you think about the power is felt at an individual level. And so in my mind, it's a different way at the problem of addressing disease burden, of solving, the needs of the patient by using what we can see in data to make better and more informed decisions. So it's in my mind just as impactful at an individual level as it is as a population, just like, your surgeon is making a difference in their community as much as they're making a difference on an individual patient's life.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's an excellent way to put it. The customability that you get with artificial intelligence and sort of the targeting that you're able to get is very, very powerful. And, we would have covered this in the introduction as well, but are you able to just very briefly give the elevator pitch for Komodo Health and what it does today?
Absolutely. So we are a software company, an enterprise software company that seeks to understand the burden of disease globally, and using that to build incredibly powerful algorithms to help us understand disease patterns and help companies actually address the unmet needs of their patients. And so what we do is we produce a variety of software products that kind of predict where disease burden is higher or lower, and help steer institutions to making better and more informed decisions in how they go to and address the needs of their patients. So that's in a nutshell what we do. As part of that, we really collect a lot of data on the healthcare system that's anonymized and that's designed to better understand populations at scale, and then use that to inform the products that we create, and through that, improve outcomes.
Amazing. And so you mentioned there very briefly anonymized data, and it's really interesting in the healthcare space. The healthcare industry is one of those industries where you can have an absolutely outsized impact. I mean, the impact that you have directly on people's lives and their health outcomes is enormous. But on the flip side, there's a bit of a trade-off, because a lot of the benefits that can be realized with the use of technology require access to certain information that folks may find to be private information. And so you mentioned Commodore uses anonymized data. Is there any sort of a compromise that you're making since the data is anonymized? How big might that compromise be? And do you see that sort of changing in the future as well?
Absolutely. So the important thing that is evolving in the way that we think about data in healthcare is moving from effectively institutional or third-party consents to first-party consents, individuals. And I think that transformation is one that will actually change the quality and depth of data that's available for folks to build into models. Now, starting with where you began, I think healthcare has a very different value proposition for data, right? So I'm using your data to improve public outcomes, like to improve the outcome, the health of other folks. And that is an incredibly mission-oriented view of the world. I'm not using this to serve up a better advertisement. I'm not using this to target you in any way. I'm using this to understand where is our healthcare system failing people and where are they succeeding. And so to maintain anonymization and still create a ton of value for the industry is actually not very difficult. There's incredible signals that tell us where disease burden exists, and it doesn't even need to get to a level of fidelity that puts any privacy at risk. And, it's not just the HIPAA standard. There are ways to go well beyond that ensure that private data stays private. But I also think we're in a world where we are offering patients the opportunity to consent for that conversation to be more productive for their own healthcare needs. And this is a trade-off that every individual will eventually have to make between sharing my data for a potential benefit to me. And we do that every day when we consent to sharing data with, like a genomics company that's, profiling our genome, or even the lab that's providing you data that, that you have to consent to even access the results from. I mean, these are very interesting questions that we as individuals will sort of face, and then more as a society, is to say, what motivates me? What am I looking for when I consent to share the data? Is it some value that this app or this company is providing me? Is it my desire to do good and share for the world? Or is it, motivated by other interests that I have? Maybe I'm getting paid. Maybe there's some other relationship that I'm developing with the institution or the individual that I'm sharing data with. And I think as more and more kind of consents are made available, and as patients have an opportunity to participate in the dialogue, which I think is super exciting, it's going to increase naturally the fidelity and the quality of the data that's being generated, that they can choose or not choose to provide. And I believe that's when we'll truly see kind of the next generation of ML and AI kind of come out at scale, but that requires consents at a very large level. So how do you go from, maybe seeing tens of thousands of patients to millions to hundreds of millions? And that's a journey. And that's a journey that will take many years. And so I believe that this is our future. But even today, there's so much you can do to identify disparities in healthcare that we can have amazing impact without having to go into the type of detail that we know will fuel the next generation of AI products.
That's really fascinating. And when you mentioned first-party consents, one of the interesting things that comes to mind is it requires a lot of consumer education as well, yep. Right? The folks that are going to have to give up their data are going to have to be educated as to what exactly they're compromising and what exactly they're benefiting from, and what the benefits are of them disclosing that sort of data to companies that might benefit them in the future. And so I'm just curious, what might that look like in the future? Do you have any ideas of what that sort of consumer education might look like? I know it's a really difficult question, and we might not have the answers to that today, but have you seen any examples of how companies might do a good job of this already, or how this might shake out?
Yeah, I mean, if we compare it to the experience of choosing whether to share or, to allow cookies on your computer, it's miserable. Like, I mean, it's like manage your cookie preference. You click on it, it's this like big stack of things, and you have to dig into like accept essential cookies, and then here are like 50 other things that are incomprehensible to me. I don't even know what I'm consenting to when I click that button, but I try to click the like don't share anything, and it doesn't matter because somebody's backdoored a way into my consent somewhere else. And so this is the problem. Like, I have not seen a simple, easy way to talk about how your healthcare data will be used. Why? Because there are literally tens of thousands, probably millions of possible use cases. I could be using it to train an algorithm that will identify rare disease. Maybe I will have this rare disease, and maybe that as training data will make it more accurate to identify this rare disease that I might develop 20 years from now. That I would potentially be interested in consenting to. On the other hand, if somebody's going to use this to kind of track, me as an individual and serve me up a better ad, I probably wouldn't. But how do I make those differences kind of like known to me? And how do I explain these use cases before the use cases have ever been invented? I think this is the challenge that we run into, is simply being able to find common language to describe classes of problems that can be solved and consent against them, versus blanket consents versus very specific consents to this one thing, where then I'm going to get a consent request, every hour, effectively for my data. And so there is, in my mind, not been a standard out there that has shown a path to doing this at scale that's both humanizing as well as gives me the freedom to choose. And so these are the problems that I feel need to be solved in order for us to actually see the promise of first-party consents at scale be the norm for how AI products are built. But that, I believe, is absolutely the future. So it's just a question of timing and developing those capabilities.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I want to pivot a little bit into the Komodo data map and how it may have been impacted by the pandemic. So we'll discuss that in just a bit. But how Commodore may be leveraging artificial intelligence today, or maybe how it might be ramping up to use artificial intelligence, or maybe enable its partners and the companies it works with to leverage artificial intelligence. Are you able to speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's incredible today that the patient journey through the healthcare system is a sum of probabilities, where you happen to be born, who your primary care provider happens to be, which payer your employer essentially has decided is going to cover you, that you happen to use, and then the network that they happen to provide you. So there are all of these things that exist in the market that you are subject to. And then at the same time, if I were to design a efficient path for a patient with newly diagnosed diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, I would find a path that goes right to a CAR T center if I have a form that's treated in that way. But we find that patients meander through the system through a series of probabilities, which have a lot to do with who they tend to see and what that physician or provider more generally tends to believe. And I think this is one of the challenges of being a patient in this country. We have access to incredible technology, but we don't have a system that's actually designed with the patient in mind. It's designed with the employer, the provider, the payer, the life sciences company in mind. And so we believe that actually data is a great equalizer. We can see meandering paths that are inefficient and lead to worse patient outcomes. We can see paths that are very directly efficient. And if we can use AI as we are getting more information in both tests and diagnostics that are being run all the way through the journey of the patient experience and across the process, we can develop better pathing for patients through the healthcare system. And we have a very fundamental belief that AI can be used to solve these problems. There are just these incredible models that we and others have built to really understand that journey and to really predict at a fairly accurate level which patients are likely needing to be tested for rare disease, needing to go see a certain provider that they may not be seeing, and how we actually then intervene in the system to drive that behavior. That's where we need this very complex system to work together, because again, the patient's not being summoned to a particular institution through their app quite yet. But what we've seen with the pandemic is that we very well can create a fully digital experience for a lot of conditions. Can we also get to the patient in a more efficient way? But the problems that Komodo Health is solving is really understanding these challenges at scale and being able to use artificial intelligence, machine learning, and other techniques to be able to create a more efficient and improved experience for those patients and institutions that are seeing them.
And do you have any examples of companies that you might work with that are leveraging the quality and quantity of data that Komodo Health provides to do some exciting things that may be related to AI that you're able to disclose? I also understand
Absolutely.
There's confidentiality concerns here.
Yeah, I'll talk about a generalizable problem, which is the issue of patients with adult onset rare diseases. So a patient who has a rare disease who doesn't find out till they're in adulthood, it's something that's not necessarily screened for at birth or in the early years of life. These challenges are the ability to get yourself diagnosed is really difficult. And you may see a variety of symptoms. And we've worked with a number of companies in the rare disease space, from providers to life sciences companies that are producing therapies for patients with rare disease. And one of the biggest challenges of adult onset rare disease is testing. So this lends itself very well to a classification problem. I need to understand on poorly sampled data what is likely to be a true positive versus a true negative case. So just even the labeling and then building models that actually then predict and can sort patients, based on the level of likelihood that they have a disease, and then to intervention, which is to sort of test the patient and then to be able to constantly learn and improve as we see results on that patient. These types of closed loops have been built and we think are incredibly effective to getting patients who have a rare disease diagnosed. And we think this is a phenomenal problem where we've already seen incredible results, and that we measure ourselves by really looking at whether a patient has been able to get a confirmatory diagnosis years before they would have at a state that maybe they've decompensated to the point where they'll have a poorer outcome. And so we really want to be able to find this out early. We really want to treat early. And machine learning has been just a very powerful approach to be able to bring this out at scale. And we see this extremely successful. And that's an opportunity in quality, as you said, like both in the quantity and quantity of data. That's where good quality data that's processed well, that forms the foundation well, turns out to create great opportunities at scale. But I don't want to think about this as just a rare disease problem. We can actually predict, and we're seeing this during the pandemic, as institutions were shutting down, where will outcomes be worse? Simply because patients with poor access to healthcare will not get the healthcare they need during a time when we would be maybe more proactive in ensuring they got what they need. And you can start to see geographically across certain segments of the population, different stories on outcomes. And using that, you can actually tune the system to be very aggressive in ensuring that patients who need care will get it. And so we see that even at a large scale, and then from a quantity standpoint, where you need to have representation across the country, we see that problem as one that lends itself very well to ML. And so there are examples across the spectrum that we can provide, but it really just goes to show you that there's so much power in being able to use this to influence policy as well as to improve outcomes at an individual level.
Amazing. Okay, Arif, so one of the questions that I have is, in the healthcare industry, Komodo Health is playing a very important role in enabling the infrastructure that will allow for a proliferation of artificial intelligence applications. It all starts with having good quality data and having a lot of it. And obviously, Komodo Health is assisting with that in a very major way. What opportunities or what trends are you most excited about in the healthcare space that may have something to do with AI? Maybe you discussed this already, but is there anything in mind that you're particularly excited about?
Yeah, I feel like we've had this incredible explosion of completely reimagined digital-first pathways in healthcare, where the entire genesis of the patient experience and all the data related to that patient experience is through an app. This transformation, I think providers are a little bit slow on the uptake to realize just how profound the transformation is. I think a lot of people talk about it at a high level. I know they all say that they're building an experience for patients, but if you can completely disintermediate your local doctor's office, what's that experience going to be like 5 years from now? So there are a whole bunch of things we can't do. We have to go into an office for, as devices are sent to the house, as tests are sent home, as things can be done virtually, screening all the way through can be done with sensors. How does that change the experience of the patient? We are in the early innings of that. And there's an entirely digital native backbone that's being built off of this. And we think that is perhaps the most profound trend. And again, everyone talks about, telehealth was accelerated 5x during the pandemic. Absolutely true. But beyond telehealth, so many things that you thought traditionally to have to go see a doctor for, we can now start doing through at home or through a variety of providers that are digital first. So that's number one. Number two is I believe that the healthcare system is evolving in terms of the next set of therapies to come to market. We're seeing a lot more cell and gene therapy. We're seeing a lot more digital therapeutics kind of get out there. And that whole evolution of the nature of therapy and what we consider therapy and the modalities with which therapy is both delivered as well as the way that it helps us, that we are just at this very interesting inflection point for biotech. And we think that has a profound impact on the healthcare system. We think it will have an impact on quality of life, on outcomes. And we're just starting to see a lot of the exciting things come to market where after kind of years of very unproductive R&D for life sciences. So we think there's a huge kind of shift that's happening. And that's largely because of AI being applied to drug development and pulling it through. And then finally, we're seeing a shift in the way that the population thinks about health. There's so much more cognizant of disparities. There's so much more aware of what our system is not doing for us. We talk about this personalization of healthcare, the consumerization of healthcare, but I feel like patients are finally demanding a different way to be engaged, and they're voting with where they spend their time in a very meaningful way. And I think that has a dramatic power to reshape industry. And we've wanted this kind of consumer-driven digital healthcare revolution for 15 to 20 years, but I finally feel like we're at the point where the demands of our people are actually out there, and they're happening in a way which is profoundly changing who matters in healthcare today. So more that we'll be able to say and see in the coming months, but I'm absolutely convinced that this is a seismic shift for the industry.
Wow. Well, Arif, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Haroon. Wonderful to chat with you as always, and look forward to connecting again soon.